after the last top 10 video I did to close out 2022, there was a comment asking specifically about monster movies, and it kind of got me thinking. I love monster movies, and I think I might have seen the movie Jaws more times than any other movie in my lifetime. I mean, there is just something about great monster movies that I just can't get enough of. So when I got that comment, I started thinking about what my favorite monster movies were. But I didn't want to just go back through the annals of history. I wanted to put some parameters on it. So I wanted to limit the time frame to just the last 5 years. Arbitrary? Sure. But it's my video, so I get to set the rules. And speaking of rules, let's set some ground rules. I consider a monster movie one where the monster is a real thing that exists in the world of the movie. I don't count ghosts, possessions, or demons unless the demon exists permanently in the world. To me, monsters have to be legitimately present. Like, for instance, I love the movie The Babadook. Love it. One of my favorite movies of all time. But I wouldn't consider that a monster movie. It's a supernatural movie. Nitpicky? Probably. But for the sake of this list, I wanted to put it out there in case you were wondering why certain ones were on the list. Second, there won't be any honorable mentions. If it didn't make my list, it didn't make my list. It won't be here. If anyone is dying to know what else is on my list, just ask me in the comments and I'll tell you. So here are my top 5 monster movies in the last 5 years. Sputnik. This movie was sort of billed as a Russian version of Alien, or maybe more so The Astronaut's Wife, but it ends up kind of going in a different direction than I thought it would. I think there was some obvious nods to those movies, but it really goes down a different path entirely. The movie's about an astronaut that comes back from a troubling mission up in space, and the government, Russian government, believes that something came back with him. So they call in a doctor to come in and examine him at the, astronaut base or whatever. The interesting thing here is it doesn't focus on the part that I thought they would focus on. I thought it was going to be like a psychological cat and mouse kind of game where the doctor comes in and is sparring with the astronaut, and it's a big is he or isn't he something else kind of thing. But it doesn't do that at all. I mean, it was very clear from the very beginning that he has a thing inside him. And so the focus sits more on figuring it out and dealing with it, but it's also not as cut and dry as that either. So basically, as the bond between this alien thing inside this guy and the host astronaut grows, it kind of opens up these different ideas about what is right, what is wrong, what they should and shouldn't be doing. And that kind of expands the story into a much broader kind of perspective, which I'm always a big fan of. The movie itself looks amazing, it's acted well, and there's some really solid creature effects. Now, I'm always leery about showing the creature in full view, but this one looks good. The story does kind of get a little bogged down later in the film, but not overly so enough to enjoy the movie. Antlers. This is a movie that tops my if only category. I really enjoyed the movie that was there, but there is a part of me that is frustrated by it. I'll tell you why in a second. This movie is about a middle school teacher played by Kerry Russell and her sheriff brother played by Jesse Plemons, who get caught up in what looks like a boy's abusive family environment. And so as she digs deeper, she realizes that the boy's family has unlocked this ancient creature from deep within a mine. But what makes this movie so engaging is the relationships of the characters. Kerry Russell is fantastic as she learns about sort of the potential trauma of this boy, and it in turn brings out old memories of her own past trauma that she's had to deal with or has not dealt with, and what that did to her. It's also interesting because the creature and the family are linked in a way that ends up eliciting pity on them and their particular situation and what they're trying to deal with. So there is definitely some nuance here. Now, getting to the if only part, I walked out of this movie theater really enjoying the film. The mood, the atmosphere, creature design, all great. but I just felt like it was a short version of the story that it wanted to tell. There's some side story threads that were dropped and some character beats not followed up on, but it didn't feel like it was because of bad writing. It felt like it was just removed. Upon further research, what I found was that the director had given an interview where he said that his original cut was something like 20 minutes longer, but he was asked to cut it down to the current 100 minutes. And that is truly a shame because I think it would have been a much stronger movie with that extra time. And I assume following those additional story threads would have fleshed out some of the points that were dropped in the current version. I'm only hopeful that someday we get a director's cut of this movie. The Cursed. The Cursed ended up making my top 10 horror movies of 2022. So suffice to say, I like the movie. It was an interesting take on a werewolf-style film about a group of gypsies that got run off their land I think it was like 100 years ago or so, and then curses this item, which finds its way into this wealthy landowner's family and sets into motion a series of mysterious deaths. The village believes that they're cursed, and a pathologist comes in to study the attacks to get to the bottom of what's happening. They keep the creature in the shadows for most of the movie, which I think is extremely wise. It's either in the shadows or in the weeds, and that's always kind of preferred for me. It's always better. It's always what you don't see that's scarier, showing more of the effects of what the creature did as opposed to the creature itself. Now, I mentioned in this other video that there is this sort of awkward framing device for the overall story, which does a bit of a disservice in the effort to have an end reveal, but it doesn't hinder the story that much. I mean, I just wish that they didn't have the opening, closing, wraparound scenes, which I consider kind of takes away from the heart of the story. Also, I have to mention again the fantastic oneer of the encampment raid. I have to. The Headhunter. This was a bit of a dark horse pick for me, and I usually try to keep sort of the ancillary production note stuff out of any film evaluation, just so I can see the film and look at it just on its own merit. But, sometimes it bleeds in at a point where you just can't ignore it. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute. This movie is about a man who is hunting monsters and looking for the one that killed his daughter. At first, when you say something like that, you might think that this is some sort of like rip-roaring film where he tears through monsters like some sort of medieval version of Mandy, but it's really not at all. And in fact, you actually never see him kill many monsters throughout the movie, and most of the fighting happens off screen. Now, I know what that sounds like. Don't turn this off yet. What makes it good and why I like it is because the production design and the special effects are so damn good. This movie looks fantastic. Everything looks real, it looks lived in, it's gritty, it's exactly as it should with this amazing amount of detail. The movie itself is relatively short. It's just an hour and 12 minutes long, and we spend all of that time with the main character as he just continues to go out and hunt these monsters in order to get to this one that killed his daughter. I mean, each time he goes out, he returns to his shack with another head and a bit more beat up. It's kind of a great lesson in building a story around what you don't see. And here's the kicker. According to IMDb, this movie was made for just $30,000. That's it. I literally cannot believe they got this kind of a production out of that low of a budget. I mean, that's the type of thing I just cannot ignore. I know you try to ignore budget and just look at a movie on its own, but that is just too special. So, yes, you don't see a lot of monster fights. And yes, there is basically just two characters in the whole movie. But the characters and the creature effects they do have in there are absolutely fantastic, and it turns out to be a nice little movie. The Ritual. The Ritual has the distinction for me of not only being one of my favorite monster movies, but one of my favorite horror movies in recent years. It's about four friends that reunite in Sweden for a hiking trip. They used to be kind of close-knit crew until this incident happened years earlier that kind of broke them apart a bit. And this trip is kind of an excuse to bring them all together and have a reunion of sorts. During the hike, one of the men gets injured, and it forces them to have to cut through a less traveled section of the woods in order to reach civilization and help. Fortunately, Since this is a monster movie, this takes them through the home of this strange cult who worships an ancient monster that lurks in those woods. Now, as the group of four get deeper into the woods and things start going sideways, more information about that fateful event that split them apart in the first place comes to the surface and causes conflict both internally and externally with the group as they deal with these sort of intense situations. It's a well thought out element of the story that technically didn't really need to be there, but I think it makes the story better because it adds this nice three-dimensional aspect to the story aside from just kind of running away from the monster in the woods. I love almost everything about this movie. Visually, it's striking with its patient, creative cinematography, its gray, rainy, but picturesque wood settings, the easy dialogue between really quality actors, the twists and turns of the story it takes, and one of the best creature designs I have ever seen. This movie has it all. If I had to say one bad thing about this movie at all, it is the very end of the film. It rang a bit neutral for me. Not bad, not good, just kind of neutral. I can understand the idea of not completely resolving the end in this sort of big, flashy finish, but it did kind of make me walk away from the film on a more of a somber tone, which, given how much I was enjoying the movie throughout, was a slight letdown. However, if you haven't seen it, I cannot recommend this movie enough. So that's it. That's my 5 and 5. Let me know in the comments below what you think and what your 5 and 5 would be.